I have never seen a horse fight like that. He wasn't just an animal anymore. He was a monster protecting his child. But to understand why a gentle giant would fight a pack of wolves, you have to understand why he was ready to die just 6 months earlier. This is the story of the broken giant.
In the high country of Montana, winter doesn't just arrive, it conquers. The wind howls through the valley like a wounded animal, stripping the warmth from anything living. My name's Jack, and I've run this sanctuary for 30 years. I've seen animals recover from gunshots, traps, and starvation, but the hardest thing to cure is a broken spirit. Let me tell you about Samson. Samson was a Clydesdale, 2,000 pounds of muscle and power. For 12 years, he pulled heavy wagons in parades, surrounded by cheering crowds. He was a king. But then, an infection took his left eye, and just like that, the king was discarded. When he arrived at my ranch, he was a ghost. He didn't pace, he didn't eat much. He just stood in the darkest corner of the barn, pressing his forehead against the cold wood. Day after day, week after week. I tried everything, sweet grain, grooming, talking to him, but Samson had decided that his life was over. He was simply waiting to die. It was mid-January when the big freeze hit. Temperatures dropped to 20 below zero. The snow was falling so hard you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I was doing my final rounds, checking the fence line, when I saw a shape in the snowdrift near the creek. It was a doe, a mother deer. She had tried to jump the fence but got caught in the wire. She was gone, frozen solid. I sighed, ready to turn back, when I heard it. A sound so faint it was almost swallowed by the wind. Mew, mew. I dug into the snow beside the mother, and there he was, a fawn, impossibly small, maybe 2 days old. His spots were barely visible under a layer of frost. He was shivering so violently it looked like he was having a seizure. I scooped him up inside my jacket, feeling his heart fluttering like a dying moth against my chest. "Hold on, little one," I whispered. "Don't you quit on me." Back in the barn, the situation was critical. The main nursery was full. The heating lamps in the isolation room had shorted out in the storm. The only place in the entire ranch that was warm enough was Samson's stall. It was a crazy idea. A 2,000-pound depressed giant and a 4-pound fragile baby. One wrong step, one spook, and Samson could crush the fawn instantly. But I had no choice. The fawn was turning blue. I walked into the stall. Samson didn't even turn his head. He just stared at the wall. I laid a bed of straw near Samson's front hooves and placed the fawn, who I decided to call Pip, right there. "Samson," I said softly, "watch him." Samson let out a heavy sigh, shifting his weight. The floorboards creaked. I sat on a bucket outside the stall, shotgun ready just in case, prepared to stay awake all night. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then Pip let out a cry, a high-pitched, desperate bleat for his mother. Samson's ear twitched. Pip cried again, trying to stand on his wobbly legs, slipping on the straw. He collapsed against Samson's giant, hairy leg. I tensed up, ready to jump in, but Samson didn't kick. Slowly, agonizingly slowly,
The giant lowered his massive head. His nose was the size of the fawn's entire body. He sniffed Pip once, twice, and then the impossible happened. Samson began to lick the frost off the fawn's back. His rough, giant tongue massaged the little body, stimulating blood flow. He curled his massive neck around the baby, creating a wall of heat. That night, for the first time in months, Samson didn't stare at the wall. He slept with one eye open, watching over the speck of life between his hooves. Spring came to Montana, bringing mud and flowers. By now, Pip and Samson were inseparable. It was the strangest sight you'd ever see. Wherever Samson went, Pip followed. If Samson grazed in the pasture, Pip was underneath him, eating the grass Samson missed. If Samson drank from the trough, Pip stood on his hind legs to reach the water. But the most amazing change wasn't in the deer, it was in the horse. Samson had a job again. He was a father. He became protective. If the ranch dogs got too close, Samson would stomp the ground, a warning that shook the earth. Pip brought the play back into the old horse. One afternoon, I watched from the porch. Pip was doing zoomies, sprinting in circles around the giant. Samson, this old, one-eyed, arthritis-heavy horse, gave a clumsy buck. He tossed his head and trotted after the deer. He looked 10 years younger. The darkness in his spirit had been chased away by a four-legged ray of sunshine. But nature is never a fairy tale. Late October brings the hunger season for predators. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of screaming, not a human scream, a deer scream. I grabbed my rifle and ran out in my boxers and boots. The gate to the lower pasture was pushed open by the wind. They were out there. I heard snarling, yipping, the distinct call of a coyote pack. I clicked my flashlight on, sweeping the beam across the dark field. "Samson? Pip?" I yelled. The beam cut through the dark and landed on a chaotic scene. 6 coyotes had them surrounded. Pip was backed up against a tree, shaking, but between him and the teeth stood the Titan. This wasn't the gentle nursemaid anymore. This was a war horse. A coyote lunged for Pip's neck. Samson spun with terrifying speed. Crack! His rear hoof connected with the coyote's ribs, sending the predator flying 10 feet into the air. Another coyote tried to bite Samson's hamstring. Samson reared up, 12 feet of towering rage, and slammed his front hooves down. The earth literally shook. He was foaming at the mouth, eyes wild, ears pinned back. He was a fortress of flesh and bone. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for his boy. I fired a warning shot into the air. Bang! The remaining coyotes scattered into the darkness, yelping in defeat. I ran to him. Samson was breathing hard, steam rising from his flanks in the cold air. He had a few bites on his legs, bleeding, but he didn't care. He immediately turned to Pip, nudging him aggressively with his nose, checking for injuries. Pip was unharmed. I walked up to Samson and laid my hand on his shoulder. He was trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. "Good boy," I whispered. "You're a good father." Time is the one thing you can't fight. 2 years passed. Pip was no longer a fawn. He was a young buck, antlers starting to grow in velvet. He was a wild animal, and the call of the wild was getting louder. He started spending nights near the forest edge. He would stare into the trees for hours. Samson knew. Animals understand goodbyes better than humans do. One morning, a herd of wild elk moved through the valley. Pip stood at the fence. He looked at the herd, then he looked back at Samson. Samson walked up to him. He didn't try to block him. He didn't nudge him back to the barn. He simply rested his chin on Pip's back for a long moment, a silent blessing. Pip vaulted the fence. He was graceful, powerful. He ran halfway to the herd, then stopped and looked back one last time. Samson let out a loud, ringing whinny, a sound of pride. Pip turned and vanished into the trees.
Samson lived for another 3 years. He was never lonely again. He spent his days watching the tree line. Every now and then, usually at dusk, a magnificent buck with large antlers would step out of the forest. He wouldn't come all the way to the barn. He would just stand at the edge of the meadow. Samson would lift his head and watch him. No words, no touching, just two souls acknowledging that they saved each other. When Samson finally passed away in his sleep, we buried him on that hill, facing the trees, and the next morning we found fresh deer tracks all over his grave. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a thank you. They say you can't fix what's broken. Maybe that's true, but if you're lucky enough, you might find someone who makes you whole again.
There are thousands of stories like Samson's hidden in the wild, waiting to be told. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. Join our sanctuary. Help us tell the next story. Until next time, stay wild.